Okay, so today we are going to be focusing on eating disorders. And I can already tell that you're rolling your eyes and groaning because inevitably every semester when I ask students what they're most interested in learning about and least interested in learning about, eating disorders tends to be the most popular answer for the least interested in learning about. And I understand that at this point in your degree, you have heard about eating disorders multiple times. You probably heard about eating disorders in high school. Some of you may have direct personal experience of your own or a sibling or a best friend with an eating disorder. And so you're probably feeling like eating disorder overload. Why are we doing this again? The reason we're doing this again is, number one, in my past life, I've done some eating disorders research, so it's a personal interest of mine. So that's what happens. And also because we're going to take a very different approach to eating disorders. I know that, I shouldn't say I know, but I'm quite confident that at this point, your knowledge about eating disorders has centered on anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. Those are the two big ones. Those are the ones we tend to know the most about. Again, as a reminder, anorexia is when people are not eating enough, and so they essentially are becoming emaciated, but they continue to have a fear of being fat. And so they continue on this drive to lose weight, even when they're at a point where they might have to be hospitalized because of health complications due to the eating disorder. Bulimia nervosa is when people binge on food and then purge. Typically, it's an effort to lose weight that doesn't really work. So people with anorexia nervosa are typically quite identifiable. They look quite emaciated. People with bulimia run the gamut from underweight, overweight, average weight. You wouldn't know by looking at somebody that they are struggling with bulimia. So again, bulimia, binging and purging, it's an effort to lose weight that doesn't really work. Anorexia, severe drive to lose weight, becoming emaciated. DSM-5 also includes a third type of eating disorder. So up until DSM-5, this was not an official disorder. It was in DSM-4 and DSM-4-TR as a disorder that required further study. But the studies have borne out that it is its own disorder, and that's binge eating disorder. Now, there was tremendous debate about whether binge eating disorder was truly a disorder. What it is essentially bulimia nervosa without the inappropriate compensatory behavior, so without the purge. So it's people who just binge eat. And again, when we think about what a binge is, we're talking about eating in a discrete period of time substantially more than other people would eat in that same period of time, a feeling of loss of control when eating, and typically guilt associated with the eating. People with bulimia then go on to purge or to engage in some other compensatory behavior. So oftentimes it's self-induced vomiting, but it could be compulsive exercise, it could be laxative use, it could be fasting that they do to try to get rid of it. But people with binge eating disorder simply binge without doing anything to try to counterbalance the calories they've just consumed. There were a number of people who were concerned that by making binge eating disorder a DSM diagnosis, that it would stigmatize people who were overweight and try to classify every person who is overweight as having binge eating disorder. That has not been found to be the case, and in fact, many people who are overweight have never binged in their lives. So binge eating disorder does seem to be its own separate disorder. People with binge eating disorder are likely to be overweight because they are binge eating food and not doing anything to try to compensate for it. However, the vast majority of people who are overweight do not meet the diagnostic criteria for binge eating disorder. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Okay. So here's your first reflection question. See, I told you they won't always be like you're used to now getting them like further along or towards the end. One slide, one question, okay? So as I was saying before, inevitably, students in this class tell me they don't want or need to learn more about eating disorders. Thinking about your own knowledge of eating disorders, why do you think that is? So hit pause, take a minute to think about your answer, and when you're done, come back. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and I actually need to find, this was I needed to print out some stuff last night because I realized that I didn't have my DSM. So the other thing I wanted to talk about briefly was something that's new in DSM-5, which are the other specified feeding or eating disorder. So what happened prior to DSM-5 is we had 3 different diagnoses for eating disorders in the DSM. There was anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and then eating disorder not otherwise specified, or EDNOS. The vast majority of people being diagnosed with eating disorders were getting diagnoses of eating disorder not otherwise specified. The problem with that is there is 0 information contained within that statement, right? So if I'm getting a chart from somebody, another therapist is sending someone to me, and they send over their chart and I see diagnosis EDNOS, I know nothing. All I know is that they have significant concern about something to do with their eating behavior. I don't know if they're overeating, I don't know if they're undereating, I don't know if their weight is in a healthy range, if they're overweight, if they're underweight. I don't know if they're exercising, I don't know if they're purging. I don't know if they have a drive for thinness. I know nothing except there is something going on with their eating behavior that is concerning. That's a problem. Part of why we have the DSM, part of why we have so many different diagnoses and have them all outlined is to help with treatment, and then also, of course, for communication between professionals. So if someone comes to me with a diagnosis of bulimia nervosa, I have a sense of what's going on and where we might be starting treatment. If someone comes with anorexia nervosa, I similarly have an idea. EDNOS doesn't tell me anything. So what the DSM developers did was they sat down and they said, okay, what are the types of things that we're typically seeing in this EDNOS category? And so what they've done in DSM-5 is they've listed several of these disorders as an other specified feeding or eating disorder. And those are as follows. I'm going to just toss them all up, and then we'll talk about each one. The first is atypical anorexia nervosa. Now, one of the things that we've seen happening in recent years is that there are a number of people who engage in behaviors and who have the same mindset of people with a diagnosis of anorexia nervosa who don't get a diagnosis. Because one of the criteria for diagnosing anorexia nervosa is that a person is at substantially low body weight. So up until DSM-5, we actually had a cutoff. A person had to be at less than 85% of their expected weight based on their height. We've taken out the 85 as a strict number, but the gist is still there, that a person has to be underweight. There are a number of people, though, who engage in the pathological behaviors and who have the same mindset of someone with anorexia, but who are substantially overweight. And we're seeing that in people who are obese and morbidly obese, who adopt anorectic type behaviors to lose weight, but their body weight would still classify them as overweight. If somebody goes from 300 pounds to 200 pounds in a 3-month period, there's something not right there. But according to the diagnostic criteria for anorexia nervosa, at 200 pounds, they would still be considered overweight most likely, or possibly even average weight depending on how tall they were. But losing 100 pounds in 3 months without a medical illness or explanation, they are most likely engaging in anorectic behavior. And so that's where atypical anorexia comes in as a diagnosis for people who have the mindset, engage in the behaviors, but don't meet the weight criterion. Same thing for bulimia nervosa of low frequency and or limited duration, and binge eating disorder of low frequency and or limited duration. For both of those diagnoses, for the DSM-5 diagnosis of bulimia nervosa or the DSM-5 diagnosis of binge eating disorder, the person has to be binging at least twice a week on average for at least 3 months on average. So these exist for people who are engaging in the behaviors, but not at the frequency or not for the length of time that they've been at. So again, if somebody comes to you, if a parent brings you their teenage daughter, and the reason I'm using girls is because eating disorders are far more prevalent in females than males. So let's assume somebody brings their teenage daughter to me and says, you know, she's been binging and purging. And I say, well, how long has it been going on? She's like, it's been 2 months. I'm not going to sit there and go, well, for a diagnosis, it has to be 3 months. So come back in a month, right? And so that's, Caleb's raising an eyebrow. He's like, that doesn't seem, you just talked about ethics, Carrie. That doesn't seem all that ethical, because it's not. But now we have a diagnostic category for that. We can say it's bulimia nervosa of low frequency and or limited duration. If left unchecked, this person would likely progress to a proper diagnosis of bulimia nervosa, but we're intervening early, right? Or we're intervening at a lower frequency. So that's what those two diagnoses are. Again, even just thinking about these first three, atypical anorexia, bulimia nervosa of low frequency or limited duration, and binge eating disorder of low frequency and or limited duration, any of those three diagnoses tells me more than eating disorder not otherwise specified. That's why we have these now. The next one is purging disorder, which is where a person purges but without the binge. So they are purging in order to influence their weight or shape. And then night eating syndrome, which is recurrent episodes of night eating. And so you might be thinking, okay, wait a minute, like after I'm finally done doing all the reading you assign, and after I'm finally done watching all these lectures, I sit on the couch with, you know, a package of Oreos and I'm binge watching something on Netflix, and next thing I know, I've eaten all the Oreos. Is that a problem? Well, it depends, right? Does everybody sometimes, I shouldn't say everybody, but do a lot of people sometimes snack at night? For sure. Do a lot of people sometimes consume more calories than they were intending to at night? For sure. Is that night eating syndrome? No. Okay. Night eating syndrome is eating after awakening from sleep or by excessive food consumption after the evening meal. The behavior is not better explained by environmental influences or social norms. I would say sitting on the couch with the TV and a package of cookies, it's not a deliberate, I'm going to eat this whole package of cookies. It's more like I'm really just watching something and eating and not realizing what's happening. Okay? The behavior causes significant distress or impairment, and the behavior is not better explained by another mental health disorder. So this is someone who's eating a significant amount, either waking up in the middle of the night to eat or having like another, Taco Bell for a while was running an advertising campaign of fourth meal for like another dinner after dinner. That's what this would be. But it causes the person distress, and it's not explained by something else. So it's not that they've been partaking in marijuana and have a serious case of the munchies. It's not just meaningless eating while watching TV. This is much more significant than that. So these 5 have been added to the DSM to try to give a little more definition and clarity around the ED-NOS diagnosis. And finally, of course, they also did leave for us, instead of calling it not otherwise specified anymore, it's now unspecified feeding or eating disorder, which is any other feeding or eating disorder that causes impairment and distress, but does not meet any of the other diagnostic categories. Okay, so those are some of the changes to DSM-5. So at this point, I'm going to invite you to do reflection question 2. And did you just learn something new about eating disorders diagnoses? Please be honest. So go ahead and before you hit pause, you're going to hit pause, answer the question, and then unpause, come back, and we'll do a little more. Okay, so I'll be very curious to read your answers to that. So again, thank you for your honesty in advance. I'm going to assume that you're being honest. We'll see. The next thing I want to do is take us down a dark, 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 dark hole. And poor Caleb sitting here going, really? Darker yet? Yes, darker yet. And I want to talk to you about the pro-ana and Mia movements. Now, pro-ana and pro-Mia are pro-anorexia and pro-bulimia. So they took the ANA from anorexia and the MIA from bulimia. And this was a way for, again, typically adolescent girls, young adult females, to be able to talk about anorexia and bulimia in a different way that adults and other people would pick up on, because they were just talking about their friend Anna or Mia, right? So they weren't having to say anorexia or bulimia. These movements have basically exploded online. There are websites and blogs and videos devoted to helping people stay in the lifestyle. They talk about it more as a lifestyle than a mental health disorder. A lot of the websites will say things like, we're here to be a supportive community. We're not here to encourage people to become anorexic or bulimic, but to support people who are. A lot of the blog posts will open with people's stats on how much they weigh, what they've eaten that day, how many calories they've consumed, how many calories they've burned. So not really all that helpful, and definitely more encouraging of an eating disorder and the development of one. And the reason that I want to spend some time on this is because it's something that most of us, unless we're in that lifestyle, are largely unaware of. And for a lot of you, you're going to leave MRU and you are going to work with people in some capacity. And if you're working particularly with adolescents, particularly adolescent girls, you need to be aware of what they're finding online. You need to be aware of what they're seeing and what they're finding and what's feeding into their mindset. So basically what follows are a bunch of links. Okay, we'll stop at that one first. So again, I'm not going to take you through them, but I'm going to expect that you will have looked at them. The first, again, Wikipedia, always a good starting point, never a good ending point, but just to tell you a little bit more about the history of this. The first video on YouTube, it's a little bit older, but it's a news clip of someone who used to be anorexic and who was very much spending a lot of time on pro-Mia and pro-Anna websites, talking about that. Then pro-Thinspo it's a disturbing website, but it's kind of my favorite one to play with in class, so I'm kind of sad that I don't get to do that with you. It just has a ton of information, each page more bizarre than the next. Last year, last winter term actually, both classes and I learned a lot about breatharianism. Yeah, on that website. So it's a fun one to click around on. It's also a little bit horrifying. My pro-Anna, which has some blogs, so people talk about what's going on and how they're looking for support. And then finally, just a Pinterest page of Thinspiration. So again, you can find it anywhere. Similarly, heading into what is Thinspiration, so this is also a YouTube video for you to watch. Thinspiration, the idea behind Thinspiration is that if you're hungry, go watch a YouTube video instead and get some Thinspiration so that you don't eat. And so the ideas behind Thinspiration tends to work one of two ways. It's either images of morbidly obese people to get you thinking you don't want to eat because you don't want to look like that, or really, really, really thin people so that you're looking at it thinking, I want to look like that, I'm not going to eat. And people will say that, yeah, they go watch a Thinspo video and they feel satiated, they're not hungry anymore. So again, please do watch that one. And then come on back. And again, we will talk about these in our live discussion, okay, for sure. And at this point, here is your third reflection question for today. Do you think that all pro-Anna, pro-Mia, and Thinspiration sites and videos should have to have a disclaimer that it's adult material, like pornography, for example? If so, who would enforce that? And so part of the impetus for this question before you answer it is what you will have hopefully seen is that when you went to the YouTube video, I'm trying to remember. I don't know if you need to sign in for this one. The video that I used to have for Thinspiration that was actually taken down off of YouTube, you had to sign in to verify that you were over 18. So I just sort of wonder, like, would that be something that would be helpful or not for all pro-Anna, pro-Mia, Thinspo stuff? So think about that. And when you're ready, come back. And we've got some more fun and games. Okay. So in class right now, at this point, you would have been sort of disgusted. We would have had our break. Some of you would have gone to get food. Some of you would have gone to get lots of food. I've had students in the past after this introduction be like, all I wanted was a burger, right? After hearing all this, I just wanted a burger. And if we were live in class right now, I would be putting on a video for you to watch. It's about 45 minutes, excuse me. And you can stream it right from the library website. So here's the information that you need. It's called The Hunger Within. It's an older video, but it's really interesting and focused on a treatment program in British Columbia. It's available to stream through the Films on Demand database through the MRU library website. So you do need to be logged in, signed in to the library website, but you can stream it right there. If the link doesn't work, sometimes the Films on Demand links and Canopy are a little bit fussy, especially because if you're not signed in or this, that, the other. But so if the link doesn't work, search for Films on Demand. Then when you're in Films on Demand, search for The Hunger Within, and you'll want to select the full video as opposed to the segments. Okay? Really pretty important that you have watched that before our discussion in class. And then after you've watched that, these are just some follow-up links about Peggy Claude Pierre, who the video is about, of course, that you've watched. So feel free to take a read through some of these, and then we can talk about all your feelings about it and about what I have just done to you by having you watch that in class. So I'll see you guys live later on this week.